I forgot to record. So we said that nuclear weapons are never justified. It was uh, it was not a reply for just bombing Pearl Harbor. It was worse than this because they bombed civilians, and they bombed whole cities, not just military places. Okay, so some I want to show you pictures because the United States regret throwing the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Here, girls, here is it. Look.
71 years ago, on a bright, cloudless morning, death fell from the sky and the world was changed. A flash of light and a wall of fire destroyed a city and demonstrated that mankind possessed the means to destroy itself.
Miss, are there sound or no?
Oh, you didn't hear?
No, miss.
Is
It was there, but it got removed.
I reshare it. So, girls, President Obama was the first American president to go visit the Hiroshima. Okay.
Cloudless morning, death fell from the sky and the world was changed. A flash of light and a wall of fire destroyed a city and demonstrated that mankind possessed the means to destroy itself. Why do we come to this place? To Hiroshima. We come to ponder a terrible force unleashed in a not so distant past. We come to mourn the dead, including over 100,000 Japanese men, women, and children. Thousands of Koreans, a dozen Americans held prisoner. We may not be able to eliminate man's capacity to do evil. So nations and the alliances that we formed must possess the means to defend ourselves. But among those nations like my own that hold nuclear stockpiles, we must have the courage.
This is a survivor of the attackers. Okay, you hear me?
Okay, miss. Yes.
Yes,
To
miss.
escape the logic of fear and pursue a world without them. We must change our mindset about war itself to prevent conflict through diplomacy and strive to end conflicts after they've begun.
So it tells you what, girls? It tells you that the American regret doing it.
71
The American
years
regret
ago.
doing it. They regret bombing Hiroshima. Okay?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, there, no. Here is it.
On this date, 75 years ago, August 9th, 1945, a United States
Wait a minute, Chris.
Army Air Force B-29 dropped a 10,000-pound plutonium bomb nicknamed Fat Man over the city of Nagasaki, Japan, 3 days after Hiroshima. Japan surrendered less than a week later, bringing to an end World War II. The decision by President Harry Truman to use the atomic bomb has been debated ever since. So how does it look 3/4 of a century later, especially from the vantage point of someone who was there on the ground? Harry Smith has our Sunday Spotlight.
July 16th, 1945. Of that first successful detonation of a nuclear weapon in New Mexico, Robert Oppenheimer, the head of the Los Alamos laboratory, reacted this way.
Line from the Hindu scripture, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
Less than a month later, the Enola Gay drops an A-bomb above Hiroshima. It explodes 2,000 feet above the earth. Tens of thousands die instantly.
We shall completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
3 days later, Nagasaki is the target, with a similar result. American Howard Kakita, then 7 years old, had been standing on the roof at his grandparents' home in Hiroshima. His grandmother insisted he come down.
If we stayed on that roof when the bomb exploded, we would have been burned to a crisp. This is after the A-bomb.
Howard says one way to understand the horror of that day is to look at the numbers of American lives lost thus far to COVID-19.
That took 8 months. That one primitive bomb in Hiroshima killed the same number of people in a very fraction of a second.
Yet as soon as the Soviet Union had a nuclear weapon, the arms race was on. Baby boomers were taught to do this.
Well, it was sort of ludicrous, as you will recall. We all had drills to hide under our desks.
Ambassador Wendy Sherman negotiated nuclear control issues with both North Korea and Iran.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki are the only times in history that nuclear weapons have been used. What did the world learn from that?
The world learned that nuclear weapons should only be a deterrence, not a war-fighting weapon. Now it appears that many countries are considering that there might come a time when they would use a nuclear weapon.
While the US and Russian stockpiles are shadows of their former selves, North Korea is believed to have 20 or more nukes, and Iran looks to be inching its way toward a nuclear weapon.
Do you think there's enough tension in the world, in certain places, that someone would make a purposefully wrong decision and use a nuclear weapon?
I hope not, Harry. I really hope not. I don't think actually there's any country that really wants a nuclear war, but I think through inadvertence or accident, you could see an escalation that might take us there.
It's important, I think, that we understand the misery and terror and death that it caused. If we were to be able to put all those stories together and present it to the world with the knowledge of the mistakes, I think that'll be a wonderful task to do.
For Sunday Today, Harry Smith, New York.
So what do you think again? They talk about what, girls?
About what they feel in Hiroshima and
Yes, about the nuclear weapons. Are you with me, girls? Grade 10.
yes.
This is something more than the fifth atomic bomb. This seething maelstrom of millions of tons of water pictures the dilemma of our age. With the wonders of scientific achievement before us, the choice is justice and peace, or this kind of atomic death. There is no alternative. For the second test at Bikini, this was the plan. Exploded 20 to 40 feet below the surface of the sea, a huge mass of water is forced upwards and outwards. A gigantic eruption spraying radioactive matter for miles. A little over a year ago, as these captured Japanese films show, the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima killed, burned, and maimed 194,000 people. How many more died later from deadly rays and mysterious after effects will never be known. Fabric like this was used in a woman's dress. When the bomb fell, heat branded the pattern into her flesh. All films made by Japanese official cameramen have now been confiscated. Military and medical experts will study them for the effects of the bomb. Heat, indescribably intense, traced the outline of a man's body on the concrete roads, a permanent memorial to the first use of the world's most powerful weapon. These pictures provide the true background to the deliberations of the Allied peacemakers in Paris. Their impact on our minds is itself a shock and a warning. This man is alive, but he was later to die with many thousands of others from the effects of gamma rays. All this is what one bomb did at Hiroshima. The scientists and soldiers know it. Yet till the world can be sure of peace, they also know that they must perfect the bomb. And this they have done at Bikini. Hurled a mile and a half into the air, the huge tree of water sent a wave of boiling steam rolling outwards, engulfing the anchored ships of the test fleet. Newsreel cameras in pilotless aircraft record every movement as displaced water rises like a vast, mysterious forest. Oil rings on the water are all that remains of the carrier Saratoga, the battleship Arkansas, and many other ships. The dwindled strength of the tidal wave that swamped them was picked up by television cameras on nearby islands. No one can see these pictures unmoved. Below are man's mightiest ironclads and war vessels, dwarfed and toy-like in a boiling ocean. If lasting peace cannot be created except by fear of the atom bomb, then let us be afraid. 5 bombs, 5 warnings.
Try online work and project calendars. Unlike traditional
It was so dark because of the smoke and dust being sucked up in the mushroom cloud and the ghostly procession. I say ghostly because they just didn't look like human beings. Their hair was just all standing up towards the sky. They were burned and blackened and swollen. Parts of the bodies were missing, and they were covered with blood, and clothes were tattered, and the flesh and skin hanging from their bones.
Yoshiaka stumbles to the door of the communications bunker. Climbing on top of the bunker, she is stunned to discover her city in ruins.
There was a soldier on the ground suffering from burns. I thought, there's someone on the ground, and ran towards him. He noticed me and said, half groaning, "We've been hit by a new type of bomb." A new type of bomb.
A local photographer finds a huddle of burned people on the morning of August 6th, trying to soothe their wounds with cooking oil. After seeing his classmates consumed by fire, 7-year-old Takashi Tanamori is pulled from the ruins of his burning school by a soldier and carried into the city.
There was a man, I think he was a man, unrecognizably burned, scarred, and marred. You can't tell it, but I knew that was a man. He said to soldiers who's clutching me in his arm, he said, "Water, water, please, water." And the soldier just...
"11-year-old Tetsushi Yonezawa and his mother are only 750 yards from ground zero, shielded in a crowded tram. All the other passengers are killed by the blast.
My mother and I were surrounded by people, so we were uninjured. I knocked my head and got shards of glass in my hair, but at that time I didn't notice them. My mother grabbed my hand and said, "Are you all right, Tetsushi?" When I replied that I was okay, she said that we should get off the tram.
Yoshiaka returns to her post in the communications bunker, desperate to send out the news of what has happened in Hiroshima. She finds one working phone and reaches an officer in regional headquarters.
I said, "Yes, the whole of Hiroshima has been annihilated." The person at the other end said, "I don't understand what you are saying. What do you mean, annihilated?" As I thought about how I could possibly make him understand, I remembered what the soldier on the embankment said. We've been hit by a new type of bomb. So I said to him, we've been hit by a new type of bomb.
So, girls, the more you watch,
Pizza or salad?
the more you watch, the more you feel what? toward nuclear bombs and nuclear weapons?
Thankful.
Thankful toward the nuclear weapons?
No, thankful that we did not experience such things.
Yes. Thankful
Yes,
that we
certainly.
don't. Yes, and we do not even experience war, by the way, too, because people who live under war, they face the same feelings. But nuclear weapons generally. That's why in the video we saw that they say that Iran has, South Korea has nuclear weapons. They say that in the video. I cannot, I don't know. So other countries in the world, because they fear that any country may take a wrong decision and throw a bomb on any other country. They also say that today's bombs, okay, are much worse than those who were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, okay? But actually, nuclear weapons do not just, how can I say it, they do not harm only one country. It harms more because of the radiance out of it. You understand, girls?
Yes.
Okay, there is another video. Let me play it for you.
We all know how the Second World War ended, with the decision to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August the 6th, as well as on Nagasaki on August the 9th. Whilst much is known about the decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima, not a great deal is said about the conditions in the city in the immediate aftermath of the bombing. The bomb was dropped at 8:15 in the morning. About 70,000 people were killed near instantly, with about 10,000 more dying after fires swept through the city. So in the wake of the atomic bombing, the central Japanese government didn't know what had happened. The US Air Force had been conducting bombing runs over Japan continuously for months by this point, and the alarm wasn't really sounded until the army garrison at Hiroshima stopped reporting in. After many hours of not being able to get a response, army chiefs opted to send a recon plane to see what had happened. The recon pilot saw the mushroom cloud from over 100 miles away, but before he could return to Tokyo to say what had happened, President Truman had announced the bombing to the world. Unsurprisingly, the Japanese government was completely unprepared for this event, and early rescue efforts were poor. In fact, the first people the government sent there were atomic scientists to determine whether or not the Americans were lying. So the humanitarian response in the city was pretty awful, and the reason why was that the death toll included many of the city's high-ranking officials as well as medical and military personnel. That and the fact that the building where rescue efforts were supposed to be coordinated from no longer existed. Most of the city's civilian survivors fled to the surrounding countryside, where infrastructure and the availability of food and medical supplies was extremely poor. Perhaps the most famous man to flee the city was Tsutomu Yamaguchi, who, after suffering serious burns, decided to seek safety in his hometown of Nagasaki. He survived both atomic bombings. Hiroshima and relief efforts there were plagued with supply issues. There was little drinking water, food was sometimes scarce, and it took many weeks for medical professionals to arrive en masse. In fact, in the 2 hours after the blast, the Red Cross Hospital, the largest one to survive the blast, had over 10,000 people visit. It had a capacity of 600. The man who led relief efforts within the city was a man called Shinzo Hamai, who basically worked for weeks straight attempting to fix infrastructure and save as many people as possible. His initial efforts were undermined by the fact that relief was organised through the Japanese army, and given that they intended to keep fighting the war, supplies and potential relief workers were directed elsewhere. And also, in case you're wondering, the radiation dissipated very quickly, barring a few areas of the city, and so it wasn't lethal to stay there. The city remained in its bleak state for about 2 months, when after the Japanese surrender, the city was occupied by the American military and aid became much more readily available. You should also know that the Americans pursued a policy of heavy press censorship concerning the after effects of the bombings, and thus many in Japan were unaware of how bad things were in Hiroshima. so people didn't really start to return to Hiroshima for a couple of years, and most settled in the outskirts of the city. In 1947, Hamai became Hiroshima's first democratically elected mayor, and he tried to work with the American occupying forces to improve relations. The Japanese didn't start the process of rebuilding the city proper until 1949, and it would be many more years until the city recovered to its pre-war population. Hiroshima and its people had endured unimaginable tragedy, and remembering the stories of men like Hamai and Yamaguchi are important when looking at the atomic bombings. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and a special thanks to all my Patreon supporters, James Bisonet, Marvin Cassow, Amanda.
Miss?
Yes.
I just wanted to ask you, Miss, for the homework, do we send it as like a document or in Word, or do we write it? It's fine.
Write it, please. As you want. If you want to write it in a paper, but as clear as you can, so I can read it well.
Is it fine if I wrote it? If I write it
Yes. Yes, it's okay. Okay.
Like in the Word, and I send you the.
Yes, yes. I will create an assignment after I finish.
Okay.
There is one more thing. Here, just this is the last video I want you to see. Okay, about the reason why they dropped it. This is the last one.
The world's first operational atomic bomb was dropped above the Japanese city of Hiroshima at 8:15 on the morning of the 6th of August 1945. It was carried to its target by the United States Army Air Force B-29 bomber Enola Gay, flying from the American Air Base on the Pacific island of Tinian. Nicknamed Little Boy, the bomb exploded with the equivalent force of over 12 kilotons of TNT. Around 5 square miles of the city was reduced to ashes, with over 60% of the total building stock destroyed. Within 4 days of the blast, some 120,000 civilian inhabitants had died, many of them having been instantly vaporized by the explosion. 3 days later, at around 11 a.m. on the 9th of August, another B-29 bomber from the Tinian Air Base dropped the second operational atomic bomb on the city of Nagasaki. This one was nicknamed Fat Man and had a similar impact to the Hiroshima bomb. Approximately 2.5 square miles of the city were laid waste, and over 70,000 people were killed as an immediate result of the blast. What had led to the fateful decision to deploy these new weapons of mass destruction?
So the war in Europe had ended in May 1945 with the death of Adolf Hitler in the Berlin bunker and the subsequent unconditional surrender of Germany and her remaining European allies. This had been made possible by the Normandy landings of June 1944 and the ensuing campaign to push German forces back to the Rhine and beyond. Combined with the unstoppable advance of the Red Army on the Eastern Front, this effectively crushed the German forces between two gigantic Allied steamrollers.
But the war in the Far East against Japan continued. Considerable American, British, and Commonwealth land, naval, and air forces were committed to a war of attrition over a vast area. Japanese forces fought with fanaticism and with little regard for casualties on either side. Before the advent of the atomic bomb in July 1945, the United States and her allies were planning for a conventional military defeat of Japan, as they had done previously for Germany with Operation Overlord. The equivalent plan for the Far East was called Operation Downfall.
Downfall was designed to overrun the Japanese home islands and bring about the desired unconditional surrender. Planners envisaged that their forces would not be ready to begin the operation until November 1945, and they were expecting the whole campaign to last well into the spring of 1946.
Had it taken place, Downfall would have been the largest military operation of its kind in history, putting even Overlord into the shade. But likely American and Allied casualties were a major concern for the planners and the American government.
It was assumed that Downfall would inevitably cost the invaders very dearly in this regard. Estimates varied widely, worst case scenarios predicting several million American casualties in dead and wounded.
Another key concern was the possible impact on the substantial Allied prisoner of war population in Japanese hands. Some 100,000 Allied personnel were in prisoner of war camps towards the end of the war, and it was feared that in the event of an invasion, they would all be massacred by their captors. Orders issued previously to POW camp commanders seemed to suggest that in the event of an invasion, they would be killed to prevent any possible uprisings.
A smaller scale preview of what downfall might look like was provided by the Battle for Okinawa during April to June 1945. Just over 300 miles from the Japanese mainland, this large island was a vital staging post for any invasion force, particularly as a forward airbase. The Japanese defence was mainly concentrated inland, away from the immediate invasion areas, but the Americans were immediately hit by massed kamikaze attacks, which inflicted heavy casualties amongst the naval forces, and that was even before the Marines and infantry came up against the strongly defended Japanese positions further inland.
The projected cost of Operation Downfall, particularly in terms of Allied casualties, as well as the experience of the bloody and bitter fighting for Okinawa, combined to increase the desire for an alternative war-winning strategy.
So with what seemed like providential timing, the successful testing of the world's first atomic bomb in the desert of New Mexico on the 16th of July 1945 offered just such a solution. This had been the result of several years of American-led research and development, codenamed the Manhattan Project, partly motivated by the need to respond to Nazi Germany's own wartime atomic bomb project, although this was later known to have been much less further developed than the Americans had assumed.
From the outset, Japan had also been a potential target for this new type of bomb, and the Allied leaders now had little hesitation in acting accordingly. The declaration they issued at the conclusion of the Potsdam Conference threatened Japan with prompt and utter destruction if she did not accept unconditional surrender. Her military hardliners blocked any moves in this direction, and the decision to deploy the atomic bomb was made.
Hiroshima was selected as the first target, as it was an important economic and military hub that had so far escaped serious air raid damage. When the Japanese surrender was still not forthcoming, Nagasaki became the second target. Even after this second demonstration of catastrophic destructive power, it took almost another week for the Japanese government to finally accept defeat. And this only as a result of an unprecedented intervention by the Emperor Hirohito, who forced his hardliners to bow to the inevitable.
So the Second World War was ended, with no further Allied military losses on the battlefield, but at a terrible cost to the Japanese civilian population, and with it the spectre of mutually assured destruction that dominated the Cold War era. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were essentially experiments in a new kind of warfare, whose full implications were not entirely understood at the time. Were the Allies justified in using the atomic bombs to bring an end to the war? Should they have stuck to the conventional plan as envisaged by Operation Downfall? Were there any other potential alternatives? Let us know what you think in the comments below.
Were there any alternative, girls? They could have found another solution? Or this was their only solution?
You mean a solution other than the bomb?
Yes.
Of course, there have been a lot of solutions. They would have discussed with them. They would have bombed a military place like Japan did, not the country of the people.
Yes. Okay, girls, we finished the second read. Next week we'll take the third read and we finish Hiroshima. Okay?
Yes.
Yeah, let's see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.
More. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.